The first time I wept tears of blood, I was 17 years old, standing in the infirmary of the Ashford Rice plantation in South Carolina, tending to an elderly man named Moses, who was dying of fever. The pain came suddenly, a sharp burning sensation behind my eyes, like hot needles piercing through my skull, and then I felt the wetness on my cheeks, felt the warm liquid trailing down my face. Moses saw it first. His fever-bright eyes widened with terror as he stared at me, his trembling hand reaching up to point at my face. "Blood," he whispered, his voice broken. "You're crying blood, child, you're crying blood." I touched my face, looked at my fingers, and saw the crimson staining my skin. Not tears, blood. I was weeping blood from my eyes, the drops falling onto my apron, leaving dark red stains that looked like wounds, like stigmata, like something supernatural and terrible. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking with fear. "I don't know what's happening to me. Moses died the next morning, and that's when the whispers began, when the other slaves started to notice the pattern, when I became something more than just Rose, the young woman who worked in the infirmary. I became the oracle of death, the girl who wept tears of blood, the one who could see the future written in crimson on her own face. My name is Rose, and this is the truth about the tears of blood, about the deaths I predicted, about the legend that made me feared and revered in equal measure. This is the story of how I used a rare medical condition and the superstitions of desperate people to become something I never intended to be, an angel of mercy, a dealer of justice, and a killer who was never suspected because everyone believed my gift was supernatural rather than deliberate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, at the moment when everything changed, when I discovered that the curse of my tears could become a weapon more powerful than any I'd ever imagined. I'd been born on the Ashford plantation in 1835, the daughter of a house slave and a field hand I never knew. My mother died when I was 8, and I was raised by the other women in the quarters, passed from one caretaker to another, never quite belonging anywhere, never quite fitting in. But I was smart, observant, quick to learn. And when I was 14, Mistress Ashford assigned me to work in the plantation infirmary, helping old Sarah, the elderly slave woman who served as the plantation's healer, midwife, and nurse. Old Sarah taught me everything she knew: how to treat fevers and wounds, how to deliver babies, how to recognize symptoms of various diseases, how to prepare medicines from herbs and roots. She taught me which plants could heal and which could kill, which remedies were effective and which were just superstition, which treatments would save lives and which would only prolong suffering. Sometimes old Sarah told me one day, her voice low and serious, "The kindest thing you can do for someone is let them go. When there's no hope, when they're suffering with no chance of recovery, when death would be a mercy, sometimes you have to help them find peace." I didn't fully understand what she meant until I was 16, until I watched a man named Jacob die slowly and agonizingly from gangrene, his leg rotting, his body consumed by infection, his screams echoing through the infirmary for 3 days before death finally released him. Could we have helped him? I asked old Sarah. Afterward, traumatized by what I'd witnessed, could we have given him something to ease his passing, to stop his suffering? We could have, old Sarah said quietly, but it's dangerous, child. If the master finds out we're helping people die, even when it's a mercy, we'll be punished. They don't see it as kindness, they see it as destroying their property, but she showed me anyway, showed me which herbs, in which combinations, in which doses could ease someone into death peacefully, music painlessly, looking like natural causes rather than deliberate action, showed me how to be an angel of mercy when mercy was needed, how to end suffering when suffering had become unbearable. I never thought I would use that knowledge, never imagined I would become what I became, but then Moses got sick and I wept tears of music blood and everything changed. The hemolacria, the medical term for crying blood, happened again 2 weeks after Moses died. I was tending to a woman named Ruth who'd been injured in the rice fields, her leg crushed by a falling log. The injury was severe, the bone shattered, infection already setting in. Old Sarah had told me privately that Ruth wouldn't survive, that the infection would spread and kill her within days, and as I looked at Ruth, as I saw her pain and knew what was coming, I felt that burning sensation behind my eyes again, and the blood came, tears of crimson streaming down my face, dripping onto Ruth's bandages. Ruth saw it and gasped. "Blood tears," she whispered, "just like with Moses. You cried blood the day before he died. Am I going to die, too?" "I don't know," I said, which was true. I didn't know what the blood tears meant, didn't understand why they were happening, didn't know if they were connected to death or just a strange medical condition I developed. But Ruth died the next day, music just as Moses had, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, more certain. Rose cries blood before someone dies. The slaves said to each other, "She can see death coming. She's marked by something, God or the devil or the spirits of our ancestors. She knows when death is near." I tried to deny it, tried to explain that it was just a coincidence, that the blood tears were probably some medical condition that had nothing to do with predicting death. But no one believed me. They wanted to believe in the supernatural, wanted to believe that someone among them had a gift, a power, a connection to forces beyond the physical world. And Master Ashford, an educated man who prided himself on his scientific curiosity, became fascinated by me. He summoned me to his study, examined my eyes, questioned me about the blood tears, documented every detail in a leather-bound journal. "Hemolacria," he said, reading from a medical text, "crying blood. It's a rare condition, poorly understood. Some doctors believe it's caused by extreme emotional distress. Others think it's a physical abnormality of the tear ducts, but I've never heard of it being associated with predicting death. That's extraordinary." "I don't predict death, Master," I said. Sometimes I cry blood. I don't know why, and it's just coincidence that people have died afterward." "Twice is coincidence," Master Ashford said. "But if it happens a third time, if you cry blood and someone dies the next day again, then we'll know it's more than coincidence. Then we'll know you have some kind of gift." I left his study feeling trapped, feeling like I'd become a specimen, a curiosity, something to be studied rather than a person. And I was terrified that the blood tears would happen again, that the pattern would continue, that I would become permanently marked as the girl who predicted death. But I also began to wonder, what if I could control it? What if I could make the blood tears happen when I wanted them to? What if I could use this strange condition, this supernatural reputation, for something more than just frightening people? What if I could use it to help people, to end suffering, to deliver justice? The idea came to me slowly over days and weeks of thinking about old Sarah's lessons, about the herbs that could ease someone into death, about power that came from being seen as supernatural rather than human. If people believed I could predict death, if they believed my blood tears were a sign from God or the spirits or some cosmic force, then they would never suspect that the deaths weren't predictions at all. They would never imagine that I was causing them, that I was choosing who would die and when, that I was using my reputation as cover for something far more deliberate. I could be an angel of mercy for those who were suffering, and I could be an instrument of justice for those who deserved to die. All I had to do was learn to make myself cry blood on command, to trigger the hemacria when I needed it, to create the illusion of prediction when I was actually planning execution. It took me 3 months to figure it out, 3 months of experimentation, of testing different methods, of learning how to irritate my eyes enough to trigger the bleeding without causing permanent damage. Extreme physical exertion worked sometimes. If I pushed myself to exhaustion, if I strained hard enough, the blood vessels in my eyes would rupture and I would cry blood. Certain herbs applied carefully to my eyes could cause irritation that led to bleeding. Even intense emotional stress, if I could generate it authentically enough, would sometimes trigger the condition. And once I learned to control it, once I could make the blood tears happen when I wanted them to, I became something far more dangerous than anyone suspected. I became the oracle of death, the girl who wept tears of blood and predicted deaths, the supernatural figure who terrified and fascinated everyone on the Ashford plantation. But I wasn't predicting deaths, I was causing them, one carefully chosen victim at a time, one act of mercy or justice at a time, one perfectly executed murder disguised as supernatural prophecy. And no one ever suspected, because who would imagine that a 17-year-old slave girl could be capable of such sophisticated deception, such calculated killing, such perfect manipulation of superstition and fear? They saw what they wanted to see, a girl marked by the supernatural, a prophet of death, an oracle who could see the future written in blood. They never saw the truth. A killer who used medicine and manipulation to become something far more powerful than any slave was supposed to be. The tears of blood were real, but the predictions were lies, and the deaths were murder dressed up as destiny. The third death came 4 months after Ruth, and this time it was deliberate, calculated, chosen. His name was Silas Morrison, and he was the plantation's head overseer, a brutal man who took pleasure in inflicting pain, who used his whip with enthusiasm, who'd beaten more slaves than anyone could count. He was hated by everyone, feared by everyone, and protected by Master Ashford because he was effective at maintaining control and maximizing productivity. But Silas had made a mistake. He'd beaten a young boy named Thomas so severely that the child had nearly died, had left him with injuries that would probably him for life, and he'd done it for a minor infraction, for accidentally dropping a basket of rice, for being a child who'd made a child's mistake. I'd treated Thomas in the infirmary, had seen damage Silas had inflicted, had listened to the boy cry for his mother while I bandaged his wounds, and I'd made a decision. Silas Morrison needed to die, but I couldn't just kill him. That would be obvious, would invite investigation, would probably result in multiple slaves being punished or killed in retaliation. I needed to make it look natural, needed to make it seem like fate or divine judgment rather than human action. I needed to make it look like I predicted it. I waited until Silas came to the infirmary complaining of stomach pains, a common enough ailment that wouldn't raise suspicions. I examined him, told him it was probably just indigestion, gave him a tonic that I said would help settle his stomach. The tonic contained a carefully measured dose of poison, not enough to kill him immediately, but enough to make him sick, to weaken him, to set in motion a process that would kill him within 24 hours. And then that evening, I made myself cry blood. I used the method I'd perfected. A combination of physical exertion and herbal irritation applied to my eyes. I ran until I was exhausted, until my heart was pounding and my blood pressure was elevated. Then I applied a carefully prepared mixture of herbs that caused intense irritation and inflammation, and the blood came, tears of crimson streaming down my face, visible to everyone in the quarters. Rose is crying blood, someone shouted, the death tears, someone's going to die tomorrow. The slaves gathered around me, their faces filled with fear and awe. They asked me who was going to die, if I knew, if I could see the future. I told them I didn't know, that the tears just came, that I couldn't control them or interpret them. But I knew exactly who was going to die because I'd already poisoned him. Silas Morrison died the next afternoon, writhing in agony, his body convulsing, his stomach destroyed by the poison I'd given him. The plantation doctor examined him, concluded that he died of natural causes, probably some kind of acute gastric illness, unfortunate, but not uncommon, and everyone remembered that I'd cried blood the night before. Everyone remembered the prediction, the supernatural warning, the tears that had foretold Silas Morrison's death. She knew, the slaves whispered to each other. Rose knew he was going to die. She saw it coming. The blood tears never lie. Master Ashford was fascinated, almost obsessed. He summoned me to his study again, examined my eyes again, questioned me extensively about the blood, tears, and the deaths that followed them. 3 times now, he said, his voice filled with wonder. 3 times you've cried blood, and 3 times someone has died the next day. That's not coincidence, Rose. That's a pattern. That's a gift or a curse, depending on how you look at it. I don't understand it, Master, I said, maintaining my facade of innocent confusion. I don't know why it happens or what it means. Music, I just know that sometimes I cry blood and then someone dies. Can you control it? Master Ashford asked. Can you make it happen, or does it just come upon you? It just happens, Master, I lied. I have no control over it. It's like something takes hold of me, something I can't explain or resist. Master Ashford made extensive notes in his journal, documenting every detail, theorizing about possible explanations. He consulted medical texts, wrote letters to doctors in Charleston and Savannah, tried to find some scientific explanation for what he was witnessing, but he never suspected the truth, never imagined that I was causing the deaths, that I was using the blood tears as cover for deliberate killing, that I was manipulating him and everyone else on the plantation. Over the next year, I cried blood 7 more times and 7 more people died, some from mercy, some from justice, all of them chosen carefully, all of them killed in ways that looked natural or accidental. An elderly woman named Martha, who was dying slowly and painfully from cancer. I gave her a peaceful death, eased her suffering, sent her gently into the darkness. I cried blood the night before, and when she died, everyone said I'd predicted it, that I'd seen her death coming. A cruel slave driver named Jacob, who'd raped multiple women and beaten countless men. I poisoned him slowly, made it look like a wasting disease, let him suffer for weeks before he finally died. I cried blood the night before his death, and everyone said it was divine judgment, that God had marked him for death and used me to announce it. A young man named Samuel, who'd been injured so severely in the rice fields that he would never walk again, who'd begged me to end his suffering. I gave him a peaceful death, held his hand while the poison worked, whispered prayers over him as he slipped away. I cried blood the night before, and everyone said I'd seen his fate, that I'd known death was coming for him. Each death reinforced the legend, strengthened the belief that I could predict death, made me more feared and more revered. The slave began to treat me differently, with a mixture of respect and terror, seeing me as someone touched by the supernatural, someone who existed on the boundary between the living and the dead. And Master Ashford continued to document everything, continued to study me like a scientific specimen, continued to try to understand the gift I possessed. He treated me better than most slaves, gave me privileges and protections because he valued me as a curiosity, as something rare and extraordinary that reflected well on him as an enlightened, scientifically minded plantation owner. Your famous Rose, he told me one day, I've written about you to colleagues in Charleston, in Savannah, even in Philadelphia. Doctors and scientists are fascinated by your case. Some want to come study you, to examine you, to try to understand the mechanism behind your predictions. I don't want to be studied, Master, I said, which was true. The last thing I needed was sophisticated medical examination that might reveal the truth about what I was doing. I know, Master Ashford said, and I won't allow it. You're my property, my discovery. If anyone's going to study you and publish findings about you, it will be me. His possessiveness protected me. Ironically, his desire to be the sole authority on my gift meant that he kept other doctors away, prevented the kind of scrutiny that might have exposed my deception. And so I continued my work, continued to be the oracle of death, continued to use my reputation and my carefully cultivated ability to cry blood on command, to deliver mercy and justice in a world where both were in desperately short supply. But I also knew that I was taking enormous risks, that one mistake could expose everything, that if anyone ever figured out what I was really doing, I would be killed, probably tortured first, made an example of, destroyed in the most brutal way possible. I was walking a tightrope between power and destruction, between being revered and being executed, between using my gift to help people and being discovered as a killer who'd been hiding behind supernatural reputation. And I knew that eventually someone would figure it out. Someone would look past the blood tears and the predictions and see the truth underneath. Someone would realize that the Oracle of Death wasn't predicting deaths at all. She was causing them. That someone turned out to be Dr. Henry Whitmore, a physician from Charleston who came to the plantation in the fall of 1853 to investigate the remarkable case of the slave girl who could predict death. And Dr. Whitmore was a skeptic, a rationalist, someone who didn't believe in supernatural explanations, and who was determined to find the scientific truth behind my supposed gift. He was going to be a problem, a serious problem, and I was going to have to be very, very careful about how I dealt with him, because Dr. Whitmore was smart, observant, and persistent, and if he figured out what I was really doing, if he exposed my deception, everything I'd built would come crashing down. The Oracle of Death was about to face her greatest challenge, and the outcome would determine whether I continued my work or whether I became just another slave destroyed by the system I'd been trying to undermine. Dr. Henry Whitmore arrived at the Ashford plantation on a crisp October morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an expression of professional skepticism that immediately made me nervous. He was in his 40s, tall and thin, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything, that studied me with the intensity of someone who was determined to solve a puzzle. "This is Rose," Master Ashford said, introducing me with obvious pride. "The girl I've been writing to you about, the one who cries blood and predicts deaths." "Fascinating, Doctor," Whitmore said. Music, but his tone suggested he found it more suspicious than fascinating. "I've read your letters, Richard, very detailed observations, but I must confess I'm skeptical about the supernatural interpretation. There's usually a rational explanation for phenomena that appear miraculous. I'm not claiming it's supernatural," Master Ashford said defensively. "I'm simply documenting what I've observed. Rose cries blood and then someone dies the next day. It's happened 10 times now. That's a pattern that demands explanation." "Indeed," Dr. Whitmore agreed, "and I intend to find that explanation. With your permission, I'd like to examine Rose, to observe her, to study the circumstances of these deaths more carefully." Master Ashford agreed, pleased to have a respected physician validating his interest in my case, and I was assigned to assist Dr. Whitmore, to answer his questions, to submit to his examinations. It was the most dangerous situation I'd faced since I'd begun my work, because Dr. Whitmore wasn't like Master Ashford, wasn't fascinated by the supernatural, wasn't willing to accept mystery as an answer. He was a scientist, a skeptic, someone who would look for rational explanations and who might actually find them. "Tell me about the blood tears, Doctor," Whitmore said during our first private conversation in the infirmary where he'd set up a temporary examination area. "When do they happen? What triggers them? How do you feel when they occur?" "I don't know, sir," I said, maintaining my facade of innocent confusion. "They just happen sometimes. I feel a burning sensation behind my eyes, and then the blood comes. I can't control it or predict it." "And you believe these tears predict death?" Dr. Whitmore asked. "I don't know what to believe, sir," I said. "I just know that when I cry blood, someone usually dies the next day. It's happened enough times that people think I can see the future." "But you don't feel like you're seeing the future," Dr. Whitmore pressed. "You don't have visions or premonitions." "No, sir. I just cry blood and then someone dies. I don't know why or how." Dr. Whitmore examined my eyes carefully using instruments and techniques I'd never seen before. He tested my vision, checked for abnormalities, looked for any physical explanation for the hemolacria. "Your eyes appear normal," he said finally. "No obvious pathology, no structural abnormalities that would explain spontaneous bleeding. The hemochromia is real. I can see evidence of previous bleeding in the blood vessels, but I see no reason why it should be connected to predicting death." "Maybe it's not connected, sir," I suggested. "Maybe it's just coincidence that people die after I cry blood." 10 times is a lot of coincidences," Dr. Whitmore said. "But let's examine the deaths themselves. Who died, when, under what circumstances?" He spent the next week investigating, interviewing slaves, reviewing Master Ashford's records, examining the circumstances of each death that I'd supposedly predicted. And I watched him work with growing anxiety, knowing that he was smart enough to see patterns, to notice things that others had missed, to potentially uncover the truth. "I've noticed something interesting, Doctor," Whitmore said to me one afternoon, his voice thoughtful. "All of the deaths you've predicted fall into 2 categories. Either they're people who were already sick or injured, people who were likely to die anyway, or they're people who died from what appear to be natural causes, but who were also people that many slaves had reason to hate. Overseers, slave drivers, cruel masters. Does that seem like a coincidence to you?" My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. "I don't know, sir. I just cry blood and then people die. I don't choose who dies." "Don't you?" Dr. Whitmore asked, his eyes sharp and penetrating. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you might be choosing very carefully. The sick and suffering who need mercy, the cruel and brutal who deserve justice. Those are the people who die after you cry blood. "I don't understand what you're suggesting, sir," I said, though I understood perfectly. "I'm suggesting, Doctor," Whitmore said slowly, "that you're not predicting deaths at all. I'm suggesting that you're causing them, that you have access to medicines and poisons through your work in the infirmary. Show that you're using that access to kill people, some out of mercy, some out of justice, and that you're using the blood tears as cover, as a way to make it look supernatural rather than deliberate." I stared at him, my mind racing through options, through possible responses, through ways to deny or deflect or escape. But I could see in his eyes that he knew that he'd figured it out, that my deception had been exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you do," Dr. Whitmore said. "And I can prove it. I've been studying the deaths, Rose. I've been looking at the symptoms, the progression of illness, the circumstances, and I found evidence of poisoning in at least 3 cases. Subtle poisoning, the kind that looks like natural illness, but that has distinctive patterns. You know what to look for. You can't prove anything," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Actually, I can," Dr. Whitmore said. "I can exhume bodies, I can test for poisons, I can demonstrate that these deaths weren't natural. And then I can show that you had access to the poisons, that you had opportunity, that you had motive, and your reputation as the oracle of death, your supposed ability to predict these deaths, that becomes evidence of premeditation rather than supernatural gift." I felt the walls closing in, felt my carefully constructed deception crumbling, felt the terror of knowing that I was about to be exposed, punished, probably killed. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why not just go to Master Ashford, tell him what you've discovered, have me arrested?" Dr. Whitmore was silent for a long moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Because," he said finally, "I'm not sure I want to expose you, because I'm not sure that what you've been doing is wrong." I stared at him, shocked. "What, I'm an abolitionist, Rose," Dr. Whitmore said quietly. "I don't believe in slavery, don't believe that human beings should be owned as property, don't believe that the system we have in the South is moral or sustainable. And I've seen enough of plantation life to know that sometimes mercy and justice require actions that the law would call murder." "You're not going to turn me in?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it. "I'm not going to turn you in," Dr. Whitmore confirmed. "But I need to understand, I need you to tell me the truth. Are you causing these deaths? Are you using the blood tears as cover for deliberate killing?" And I made a decision, a dangerous decision, a decision that could still destroy me if I was wrong about Dr. Whitmore, but also a decision that felt necessary, that felt like the only way forward. "Yes," I said, "I'm causing the deaths. The blood tears are real. I have hemacria. It's a real medical condition, but I've learned to trigger it to make it happen when I want it to, and I use it as cover for killing people. Some out of mercy to end suffering when there's no hope of recovery, some out of justice to punish people who are cruel and brutal and who deserve to die." Dr. Whitmore nodded slowly as if I'd confirmed what he'd already suspected. "How do you do it? How do you trigger the blood tears?" I explained my methods, the physical exertion, the herbal irritation, the ways I'd learned to make myself cry blood on command, and I explained how I chose my victims, how I administered the poisons, how I made the deaths look natural, remarkable. Dr. Whitmore said when I finished, "You're using a rare medical condition and people's superstitious beliefs to commit what amounts to serial killing, and you've done it so cleverly that no one has suspected. That's actually brilliant in a terrible sort of way. Are you going to expose me?" I asked. "No," Dr. Whitmore said. "I'm going to protect you because what you're doing, ending suffering for the sick, delivering justice to the cruel, those are things that need to be done in a system as brutal as slavery. And if you're willing to take the risks, if you're willing to be the one who does what others can't or won't do, then I'm willing to help you continue." "Why?" I asked. "Why would you help me?" "Because I believe slavery is evil," Dr. Whitmore said simply, "and anything that undermines it, anything that delivers mercy or justice within it, anything that gives enslaved people even a small measure of power, I support that, even if it means protecting a killer." And so Dr. Whitmore became my unlikely ally, my protector, the person who would ensure that my secret remained hidden, that my work could continue, that the oracle of death would remain a mystery rather than being exposed as a murderer. But his protection came with a price, and that price would shape everything that came after, would determine how I used my gift, would define the legacy of the girl who wept tears of blood. Doctor, Whitmore stayed at the Ashford plantation for 2 more weeks, ostensibly to complete a study of my remarkable case. But in reality, he was teaching me, refining my methods, improving my techniques, making me more effective and more difficult to detect. "You're using the right poisons," he told me during one of our private conversations in the infirmary. "But your dosing is imprecise. You're giving too much sometimes, which makes the deaths too quick and potentially suspicious, and you're not varying your methods enough. If someone were to study all the deaths carefully, they might notice patterns." He taught me about different poisons, about their effects and detection, about how to vary my methods to avoid creating recognizable patterns. He taught me about symptoms and progression, about how to make deaths look like specific diseases rather than just generic illness. He taught me about timing and dosage, about how to kill slowly enough that it looked natural but quickly enough that suffering didn't become prolonged. "You're doing important work, Doctor," Whitmore said. "But you need to be smarter about it, more careful, more sophisticated. The moment someone suspects what you're really doing, the moment your cover is blown, you'll be killed, and then no one will be able to do what you're doing." He also helped me understand the HEMA better, helped me refine my ability to trigger it on command, helped me make it more reliable and more convincing. "The condition is real," he explained. "It is caused by extreme stress or physical exertion that ruptures blood vessels in the conjunctiva, the membrane covering the eye. You figured out how to trigger it deliberately, which is clever, but you need to be careful not to overdo it, not to cause permanent damage to your eyes." He taught me safer methods for triggering the blood tears, techniques that were less likely to cause long-term harm, and he helped me understand the psychology of belief, helped me see how people's desire for supernatural explanations made them blind to rational ones. "People want to believe in the supernatural, Doctor," Whitmore said. "They want to believe that there are forces beyond the physical world, that some people have gifts or curses that connect them to those forces. That desire for belief is your greatest protection, Rose. As long as people believe you're supernatural, they'll never suspect you're just very clever." Before he left, Dr. Whitmore wrote his official report for Master Ashford, a document that would become part of the permanent record, that would shape how people understood my gift for years to come. "I have completed my examination of the slave Rose," the report read, "and I must conclude that her case is medically inexplicable. The hemorrhagia is real and documented. The correlation between her blood tears and subsequent deaths is statistically significant and cannot be dismissed as coincidence. However, I can find no rational mechanism to explain how crying blood could predict death. The phenomenon appears to be genuinely supernatural in nature beyond the current understanding of medical science. I recommend that Rose be treated with respect and care, as she appears to possess a gift or curse that we cannot fully comprehend." The report was perfect. It validated my supernatural reputation while explicitly stating that there was no rational explanation, that medical science couldn't explain what I was doing. It gave me protection, gave me legitimacy, made it even less likely that anyone would suspect the truth. "Thank you," I said to Dr. Whitmore the day before he left, "for protecting me, for helping me, for understanding what I'm doing and why." "Thank you, just Doctor," Whitmore replied, "for doing what needs to be done, for delivering mercy and justice in a system that provides neither. For being brave enough to take these risks, to use your gift in ways that help people." "It's not really a gift," I said. "It's just a medical condition I've learned to exploit." "No, Dr. Whitmore said firmly. "The hemacria is a medical condition, but what you've done with it, how you've used it, the lives you've saved from suffering, and the justice you've delivered to the cruel, that's a gift. A terrible gift, perhaps, but a gift nonetheless." After Dr. Whitmore left, I continued my work with renewed confidence and improved methods. I was more careful about dosing, more varied in my techniques, more sophisticated in how I made deaths appear natural, and I was more selective about my targets, more thoughtful about who deserved mercy and who deserved justice. Over the next 3 years, I cried blood 17 more times, and 17 more people died. Some released from suffering, some punished for cruelty, all of them chosen carefully. all of them killed in ways that looked natural or accidental. An elderly man named Joshua who was dying of consumption. I gave him a peaceful death, eased his suffering, let him slip away, surrounded by people who loved him. I cried blood the night before, and everyone said I'd seen his death coming, that I'd known his time had arrived. A brutal overseer named William, who'd raped a young girl and beaten her brother nearly to death when he tried to protect her. I poisoned him slowly, made it look like a wasting disease, let him suffer for weeks before he finally died. I cried blood the night before his death, and everyone said it was divine judgment, that God had marked him for punishment. A woman named Sarah, who'd been injured so severely in childbirth that she would never recover, who'd begged me to end her suffering. I gave her a peaceful death, held her hand while the poison worked, whispered prayers over her as she slipped away. I cried blood the night before, and everyone said I'd predicted it, that I'd known death was coming for her. Each death reinforced the legend, strengthened my reputation, made me more feared and more revered. I became a figure of power on the plantation, someone who existed outside the normal hierarchy, someone who was treated with a mixture of respect and terror by slaves and masters alike. Master Ashford continued to document my predictions, continued to write about me to colleagues, continued to treat me as his most valuable and interesting property. He gave me privileges that other slaves didn't have: better food, lighter work, protection from the worst abuses of the system. But he also kept me isolated, kept me separate from the other slaves, treated me more as a specimen than as a person. He was fascinated by me, but he didn't see me as human. I was a curiosity, a mystery, something to be studied and displayed rather than someone with thoughts and feelings and agency. The other slaves had mixed feelings about me. Some were grateful, understood that I was helping people, that I was delivering mercy and justice in a world that provided neither. Others were afraid of me, saw me as touched by dark forces, as someone dangerous and unpredictable. But all of them believed in the blood tears, believed in my ability to predict death, believed that I was connected to supernatural forces that they couldn't understand, and that belief protected me, gave me power, allowed me to continue my work without being suspected or exposed. By 1856, I was 21 years old and had been the oracle of death for 4 years. I'd caused the deaths of 27 people, some out of mercy, some out of justice, all of them chosen carefully, all of them killed in ways that looked natural. And I'd never been caught, never been suspected, never been exposed. My secret was safe, protected by superstition and by Dr. Whitmore's report, by people's desire to believe in the supernatural rather than accept the rational explanation. But I also knew that I couldn't continue forever, that eventually something would go wrong, that one day I would make a mistake or someone would figure out the truth or circumstances would change in ways that would expose me. I was living on borrowed time, using a gift that was also a curse, walking a tightrope between power and destruction. And I knew that when the end came, when my deception was finally exposed, or when I could no longer continue my work, I would have to face the consequences of what I'd done, the lives I'd taken, the deaths I'd caused, the terrible responsibility of being judge, jury, and executioner for people who had no other source of mercy or justice. But until that day came, I would continue. I would keep crying tears of blood, keep predicting deaths, keep being the oracle who terrified and fascinated everyone who knew me, because someone had to do it. Someone had to deliver mercy to the suffering and justice to the cruel. Someone had to use whatever power they could claim, whatever gifts they possessed to make the world slightly less terrible for the people who had no other hope. And that someone was me, Rose, the girl who wept tears of blood. The oracle of death, the killer, who was never suspected because everyone believed she was supernatural rather than simply very, very clever. The confrontation I'd been dreading came in the spring of 1857 when a new doctor arrived at the plantation. Dr. Marcus Brennan, a young physician from Charleston who'd heard about me and was determined to solve the mystery of the blood tears. Unlike Dr. Whitmore, Dr. Brennan was not an abolitionist. He was ambitious, eager to make a name for himself in medical circles, convinced that exposing the rational explanation behind my supposed supernatural gift would bring him fame and recognition. "I don't believe in supernatural explanations," he told Master Ashford during his first visit. "There's a rational cause for everything, including this girl's blood tears and her supposed ability to predict death. And I intend to find that cause." He studied me intensively for 2 weeks, examining my eyes, questioning me about the blood tears, investigating the circumstances of the deaths I'd predicted. And I could see him getting closer to the truth, could see him noticing the same patterns that Dr. Whitmore had noticed, could see him beginning to suspect that I was causing the deaths rather than predicting them. "I need to speak with Dr. Whitmore," Dr. Brennan told Master Ashford. "I need to understand his methodology, his findings, why he concluded that the phenomenon was inexplicable, because from what I'm seeing there are very clear explanations, none of them supernatural." Master Ashford arranged for Dr. Brennan to visit Dr. Whitmore in Charleston, and I knew that this was the moment of crisis, the point where my deception would either be protected or exposed. Dr. Whitmore invited Dr. Brennan to his home, listened to his theories, reviewed his findings, and then he made a decision that would determine my fate. "You're right," Dr. Whitmore said to Dr. Brennan. "There is a rational explanation for Rose's blood tears and her supposed predictions. I discovered it during my investigation 4 years ago." Dr. Brennan leaned forward eagerly. "What is it? What's the explanation?" "The explanation," Dr. Whitmore said carefully, "is that Rose has an extremely rare medical condition, a combination of hemacria and what I believe is a form of temporal lobe epilepsy that gives her genuine premonitions of death. The blood tears are triggered by the seizures, which are so subtle that they're not obvious to observers, and during these seizures she experiences visions of impending death. Not supernatural visions, but neurological phenomena that somehow allow her brain to detect patterns and signs that others miss. It was a lie, of course, a sophisticated, medically plausible lie, that explained everything while revealing nothing about what I was actually doing." "That's extraordinary," Dr. Brennan Music said. "But how does the epilepsy allow her to predict death? What's the mechanism?" "I don't know," Dr. Whitmore admitted. "That's why I concluded in my report that the phenomenon was medically inexplicable. I can identify the conditions, the hemacria, the epilepsy, but I can't explain how they combine to produce genuine premonitions. It's beyond current medical understanding." "But you're certain the premonitions are genuine, Dr. Brennan pressed. "You're certain she's not somehow causing the deaths?" "I'm certain, Dr. Whitmore said firmly. "I investigated that possibility thoroughly. Rose has no access to poisons, no opportunity to cause the deaths, no motive for doing so. The deaths are natural or accidental, and her predictions are genuine, however inexplicable the mechanism might be. This was another lie, a deliberate deception designed to protect me, but Dr. Brennan believed it because it came from Dr. Whitmore, because it was medically sophisticated, because it provided a rational framework that satisfied his skepticism while still preserving the mystery." Dr. Brennan returned to the Ashford plantation and reported his findings to Master Ashford. "Dr. Whitmore is correct," he said. "Rose has a rare combination of medical conditions that produce genuine premonitions of death. It's not supernatural, but it is medically inexplicable. I recommend that she continue to be treated with care, and that her gift be respected even if we don't fully understand it." And so my secret was protected once again, guarded by Dr. Whitmore's lies, by his willingness to deceive other doctors to preserve my cover, by his commitment to protecting me and the work I was doing. But the close call had shaken me, had reminded me how fragile my deception was, how easily it could be exposed if the wrong person investigated too carefully. I continued my work for another 4 years until 1861, when the Civil War began and everything changed. The plantation system was disrupted, the social order was thrown into chaos, and my role as the oracle of death became less relevant as death became commonplace. As war and disease and violence killed far more people than I ever could, I survived the war, survived the transition to freedom, survived the collapse of the world I'd known, and I carried my secret with me, never telling anyone except Dr. Whitmore what I'd really done, what the blood tears had really meant, how many people I'd killed in the name of mercy and justice. Dr. Whitmore died in 1869, taking my secret to his grave. But before he died, he wrote a final entry in his private journal. A document that wouldn't be discovered until decades after both of us were gone. "I've kept Rose's secret for 16 years, he wrote. "I've lied to colleagues, deceived other doctors, protected a killer because I believed and still believe that what she did was necessary and just. In a system as brutal as slavery, mercy and justice sometimes require actions that the law would call murder. Rose understood this. She used her rare medical condition and people's superstitious beliefs to deliver mercy to the suffering and justice to the cruel. She was a killer, yes, but she was also a healer, a protector, an angel of mercy in a world that desperately needed one. I do not regret protecting her. I do not regret the lies I told, because some secrets are worth keeping. Some deceptions are worth maintaining, and some killers deserve to be protected rather than exposed. I lived until 1892, dying at the age of 57, having spent 35 years carrying the secret of what I'd done, of who I'd really been, of what the blood tears had really meant. And to the end, people believed the legend. They believed I'd been able to predict death, that I'd been touched by supernatural forces, that I'd been the oracle who could see the future written in blood. They never knew the truth, that I'd been a killer who used medicine and manipulation to become something far more powerful than any slave was supposed to be, that I'd caused the deaths I'd supposedly predicted. That the blood tears were real, but the predictions were lies, and perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps the legend was more important than the truth, more powerful than the reality, more useful than the facts. Because the legend gave people hope, gave them a sense that there were forces working for justice even in the darkest times, gave them belief that the cruel would be punished and the suffering would find mercy. And if that belief was built on deception, if that hope was founded on lies, if that sense of justice was actually just one woman with poison and blood tears, well, perhaps that didn't matter. Perhaps what mattered was that mercy was delivered and justice was served, even if the methods were terrible and the truth was hidden. I was Rose, the girl who wept tears of blood, the oracle of death, the killer who was never suspected, because everyone believed she was supernatural rather than simply very, very clever, and my secret died with me, protected by Dr. Whitmore's lies, guarded by the legend that outlived us both, preserved in the belief that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some truths are better left hidden, some secrets are worth keeping forever. This was the story of Rose, a slave on a South Carolina rice plantation who suffered from hemolacria, crying blood, and used this rare medical condition as cover for a sophisticated campaign of mercy killings and vigilante justice between 1852 and 1861. She learned to trigger the blood tears on command and used them to create the illusion that she could predict death when in reality she was causing the death through carefully administered poisons. She killed 27 people over 9 years, some to end their suffering, others to punish cruel overseers and slave drivers. Her deception was discovered by Dr. Henry Whitmore, an abolitionist physician who chose to protect her rather than expose her, writing a false medical report that attributed her predictions to inexplicable supernatural causes. Dr. Whitmore later lied to other investigating doctors to preserve Rose's cover, believing that her work of delivering mercy and justice within the brutal system of slavery was morally justified, even if legally it constituted murder. Rose's secret was never publicly revealed, and she lived until 1892, dying with her reputation as the supernatural oracle of death intact. Dr. Whitmore's private journal, discovered decades after both their deaths, revealed the truth, but by then had become a historical curiosity rather than a scandal. Rose's story became a legend in the slave community, a tale of mysterious power and cosmic justice that gave hope to people who had little else to believe in. The echoes of Rose's extraordinary deception reverberate through time, a haunting reminder that resistance takes many forms, that mercy and justice sometimes require terrible actions, and that the line between healer and killer can be impossibly thin when operating within systems of absolute oppression. For 9 years, she used a rare medical condition and people's desperate need to believe in supernatural forces to become something unprecedented. An angel of mercy who ended suffering, a dealer of justice who punished the cruel, a killer who was never suspected because everyone believed she was touched by forces beyond the physical world. She proved that enslaved people were capable of sophisticated long-term deception, that they could weaponize superstition and medical knowledge to claim power in a system designed to render them powerless. Her story challenges every assumption about agency under oppression, about the morality of killing when killing serves mercy or justice, about the value of truth versus the power of legend. Dr. Whitmore's choice to protect her rather than expose her raises profound questions about complicity, about when deception serves justice, about whether some secrets deserve to be kept, even when they conceal murder. 27 people died by Rose's hand, some released from unbearable suffering, others punished for unbearable cruelty, and the world believed it was fate or divine judgment rather than deliberate human action. If these untold stories of moral complexity and impossible choices resonate with you, join our community. Subscribe to Slave Revenge to uncover more hidden truths from the shadows of slavery. Stories of those who found creative ways to claim power, who used whatever gifts they possessed to deliver mercy and justice, who proved that resistance could take form so subtle and sophisticated that they were mistaken for supernatural phenomena. Your support ensures these powerful narratives of complex heroism continue to challenge and inspire. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Was Rose a murderer or a hero? Was Dr. Whitmore right to protect her? How do we judge actions taken for mercy and justice within systems of absolute oppression? Let us know which untold tale you'd like to hear next.